After coming out of a difficult 3-year marriage, all 23-year-old Staff Sergeant Rachel McFarland wanted was a peaceful home in which to raise her 14-month-old son.
I was in the Air Force in Oklahoma City, and my marriage to my ex-husband was tumultuous, to say the least. So I didn't really give a whole lot of thought to dating.
So Rachel was surprised when one night in the spring of 2004, she found herself at a small party enjoying a conversation with a 25-year-old man named Daryl Wilson.
Daryl and I were talking, and I noticed that he was very soft-spoken. He seemed kind-hearted, just a nice guy.
As the two shared stories, Rachel couldn't believe how much they had in common.
We each had a child from a previous marriage.
Daughter, she's 7.
Really?
They were just 6 years apart. And we wore the same perfume cologne, his and hers.
Would it be weird if I asked for your, number?
No, it's 555.
At the end of the night, Rachel felt good about the chance encounter.
I'd had a rotten couple of years, and I warmed to the idea of spending time with a guy that I thought was normal.
A few days later, Daryl called Rachel, and the two set up a movie date at her house.
I could tell he was super nervous. I thought it was pretty endearing.
Rachel learned Daryl worked at the nearby water department and had also come from a difficult marriage.
We got married pretty young.
He told me that they fought constantly, and she told him she wanted a divorce, and that crushed Daryl.
Nice to see my daughter.
I could see how much he was hurt, and I thought to myself, this is a really good guy.
No, things are better. Things are better.
Over the next year, the two continued dating, eventually introducing their children to one another.
Daryl was completely different in every respect from my previous marriage. We did normal, fun things. Daryl and I were just kind of moving along at a steady pace, and that was great.
By August 2005, the couple decided it was time to upgrade to a home where they could all live together comfortably.
I was extremely happy to see Rachel happy. And Rachel and Daryl seemed to get along just great.
Even so, there were a few hurdles to get through.
What is this?
Filling out our mortgage papers.
Daryl had declared bankruptcy, so the mortgage had to be in my name.
I should be the one providing for the family, not you.
He really disliked that. And I couldn't understand why it bothered him so much. But I think it was kind of like an affront to his manhood.
It's okay, I'll take care of it.
I operate almost entirely on logic, and Daryl was much more emotional about things. But I wasn't worried. It seemed like things were going so well.
That fall, after a year and a half together, the two exchanged vows in a private wedding ceremony.
I felt like I was walking on clouds. I believed that I couldn't possibly love anyone more than I loved him.
I was thanking God that she finally had someone that cared about her and cared about her child, and I was happy for her.
Unfortunately, after Daryl quit his job at the water department, a new side to his personality began to emerge.
Daryl really hated it, so Daryl's brother hired him on as a carpenter. Daryl knew basic carpentry, but I guess this was a lot more specialized. So Daryl would come home from work stressed out.
And when I come home, I just want a clean house. You need to calm down. Can you please get this cleaned up?
It was extremely confusing because his normal persona was so gentle.
Soon, Rachel would see her dream of a peaceful home life turn into more tragedy than anyone could have possibly imagined.
He just went crazy.
I never thought my worst nightmares this would happen.
Rachel, you don't want me, you don't love me, you don't give two about me.
I couldn't scream because he would kill us all.
After 2 months of marriage, Rachel Wilson struggled to comprehend what had changed in her husband, Daryl.
He was so mild-mannered, and now he's just really stressed out with his new job.
I want to come home. I don't want to be tripping over toys all day.
So any negative emotion for him manifested in anger He was like typical Jekyll and Hyde.
As the holiday season approached, Daryl's mood only got worse.
We were at my squadron Christmas ball, and he was arms crossed, scowling.
Hey, man, what's up?
People would say hi to him, and he wouldn't even acknowledge that they were speaking to him. He was incredibly rude. It was embarrassing to me.
Can't believe you're doing this.
Can't believe I'm doing what? I'm not doing anything.
And right then, at that moment, I knew I had to make a break because I'm not gonna put up with it. Not after the first marriage. I'm not doing that.
Rachel felt she had no choice but to kick Daryl out that night.
She was embarrassed. She didn't want to get another divorce, and she didn't know what to do, but that's what she thought was best.
Over the next few months, Daryl called Rachel several times to reconcile. But it wasn't until April 2006 when he actually apologized.
I'm so sorry. You were right. I was being a jerk. I miss you.
I was so incredibly happy. That really impressed me. It seemed more genuine.
Before Rachel knew it, their makeup sessions resulted in their first pregnancy. Daryl moved back in, and initially it seemed he'd turned a new leaf.
His anger level did seem to be much more under control.
I'll take care of this.
After the birth of their daughter, Rachel was pleased when Daryl proved himself a doting new father. By 2010, life only got better for the couple when they welcomed a baby boy, and Daryl landed a federal job with the Department of Defense.
Who are you?
I think he felt good. There was a big bump in pay, and then there were great benefits. It was a very happy time.
Sadly, it wouldn't last. Daryl's new job only seemed to stress him out more than ever, as he quickly reverted to his former self.
Rachel, are you stupid? This place is a mess. Clean. You clean all day. Is that what you do?
Daryl's anger took an abrupt upswing.
It soon became obvious to Rachel that the marriage was over.
Every day, it was just like a pit of misery.
So where's dinner?
In 2011, after 6 years of marriage, the couple formally separated.
I know he felt as badly as I did about what a separation between us would do to the kids, but he found somewhere else to live. And we made it work. It felt so amazing with him gone.
That spring, Rachel decided to get out of the house and joined one of her friends at a local nightclub, and was glad she did.
I ended up talking to this guy.
I'm Bill.
The 23-year-old introduced himself as Bill Schnittman and explained he was an Olympic trainee at the nearby facility for rowers.
We talked pretty much the rest of the night, and I was just happy to have a diversion. He was super funny and really, really cute.
Rachel thought it was just friendly flirtation, so she was shocked when Bill asked her out to lunch.
We stretched lunch into a couple of hours. I found myself feeling kind of lighthearted and excited. He was amazing.
Bill just made Rachel feel like living life. I could see her free spirit coming back.
As Rachel and Bill grew closer, her newfound happiness was impossible to hide. And over the next year, Daryl became increasingly suspicious that she was seeing someone. Even though they planned to officially file for divorce, Daryl remained possessive of her and began calling and texting Rachel incessantly.
He would either be talking about how I was the love of his life or I was the spawn of Satan, and it struck me as really creepy and really out of character for him.
One fateful morning in August 2012, Daryl took his disturbing new behavior one step further.
I spent the night, and when Bill and I got up the next morning, we decided to take a walk. I saw Daryl charging up the front lawn. It was more just shock. Bill had never met him before, and I was scared about what Daryl's intentions were. I figured Bill just wouldn't answer the door, but he did.
In August 2012, Rachel Wilson's boyfriend Bill Schnittman came face to face for the first time with her estranged husband, Daryl.
I didn't think about running, I just did it. And I was scared about what his intentions were. Bill answered the door, and I could sort of hear them talking.
What are you doing here?
Where's Rachel?
And
Rachel!
Bill kept telling him he needed to leave, and Daryl wouldn't.
I want to talk to her. Rachel! Get out of here! Right now!
He just stood there and kept yelling.
Fuming, Daryl took off.
Bill and I both believed that he was going to go back to just being a big a-hole. He'd always been such a normal, boring guy, and we were waiting for him to go back to his normal, boring existence.
Daryl had another plan.
He started tracking me everywhere that I went.
What are you doing here?
He wasn't going to work because he was tracking me around the clock, and that creeped me out bad.
You ever seen my kids,
You
Rachel?
cannot be here.
When I learned Daryl was stalking her, I was scared for Rachel's life because at that point, he was not very stable.
No rights, Rachel.
Soon, Daryl turned his anger toward Bill.
Daryl got Bill's name, and after that, he started Googling Bill. I mean, just everything there was to find about him. He found it.
And it wasn't long before Bill began receiving vulgar, threatening messages from Daryl. By December of 2012, Rachel and Bill couldn't take it anymore, and they both filed protective orders against him.
Daryl was threatening her and Bill continually, and obviously they knew that their lives were in danger, and they were really trying to do whatever they could to prevent it.
While Rachel's protective order was approved on behalf of her and her children, Bill's, unfortunately, was not.
Bill would have been granted one, but he somehow made a clerical error, didn't include the right document, and that's why it was denied. But for a man to file a victim protective order against another man is highly unusual.
I was concerned that Daryl would just continue harassing them. That's not normal behavior.
Rachel and Bill also started tracking and recording Daryl's calls and messages.
You're worthless, and I can't stand it. I love a person that would do this to somebody. You're all that matters to me. Do you not understand? I hate you. I love you so much.
I was looking over my shoulder all the time. I was in such a high state of anxiousness.
Then, by the end of December, it seemed Daryl had finally come to his senses.
Daryl sent me an email, and he apologized for his crazy behavior, and then he said, I should have left you alone. It took forever, but this is gonna stop. It was like I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that felt really, really good.
Rachel and Bill went to bed that night, feeling the worst was finally behind them. But they couldn't have been more wrong. In the early morning hours of December 21st, 2012, Rachel Wilson and her boyfriend Bill Schnittman were under attack.
The next thing I was aware of was shouting and gunfire. Daryl fired several shots and hit Bill twice, in the hand and the shoulder.
Before Rachel could even react, Bill sprang into action despite his injuries.
Bill was fighting with Daryl at the door of the room.
Get off! Rachel, come on!
Nothing was making any sense. I saw Bill on the floor, and I couldn't understand how he got there. and there was blood all over the bed, and I realized that my left hand had a gunshot wound in it. And then Daryl pointed the gun at Bill's head.
See what you did? Did you see what you did?
I knew, no matter what, that I couldn't scream because I couldn't let the kids wake up. If they did, I knew he would kill us all. I couldn't panic, and I knew if he wanted me dead, I was gonna die.
Get in the car right now. Sit down.
He put me in the car,
Come here.
and then he'd rape me.
Take it. Take it. Take it right now.
He handed me his phone and told me to type what he dictated.
This is my last night on earth. My wife doesn't love me anymore. My happiness. And now it's all over.
It was a very long and rambling suicide note.
Daryl made her post the note to his Facebook page. Luckily, someone who saw the message called 911.
When police arrived there, they were actually in the driveway. He was holding a gun to her head.
At that moment, I thought, I'm dead. The police are here. He's going to kill me now. And instead, he said,
Get out! Get out!
Suddenly, Daryl took off.
Officers quickly followed in pursuit. Meanwhile, Rachel was placed in the police cruiser.
He's at 100.
I could hear over the police radio details of the chase.
He's at the overpass.
He's hit 124.
With all this chaos and all this horror around me, I was in shock. I couldn't function. And then I saw them bring Bill out on a stretcher. He was still alive. I knew that he'd made it this far. He's hurt really bad, but he's gonna be okay. And at the same time, they brought my kids out. And it was just this flood of relief. Daryl shot himself in the head. I heard that he was still alive, and I thought, oh my gosh.
It was a very gruesome scene on the interstate, and trying to reason what he did, there is no reason for it. You can't explain obsession and craziness. He had a goal, and there was nothing that was going to stop him.
As officers processed the crime scene, Rachel was taken to the nearest hospital while her children stayed with law enforcement.
The gunshot wound itself was pretty straightforward to repair. And then a police officer came in and told me that Daryl had died. I didn't even have time to feel anything.
Later that day, Rachel received more horrible news. Bill had also passed.
That, by far, was the absolute worst. It was worse than seeing him shot. Inside my head, I was just screaming. I don't think I'd ever felt more alone.
Rachel, she was broken. She was just devastated. She really loved Bill. She didn't know what to do without Bill.
Overcome with everything that happened, Rachel thought back to her relationship with Daryl.
There were a lot of things with Daryl that were huge red flags that I didn't give a proper weight. The fact that he was married before and it ended badly, and I knew he had experienced quite a bit of rejection in his life, and he was not able to control his emotions. And I think Daryl felt like he was being replaced by a younger, handsome man, but I didn't understand what can happen in someone when they lose control.
Today, Rachel still feels overwhelming guilt about Bill's tragic murder.
It's impossible to not constantly say to yourself, if only I'd been able to get help sooner. It was eating me alive, but nothing I could have done could have saved him.
I still worry about Rachel. She is working towards being happy again, but it is going to take time.
Since Bill's death, Rachel has moved her children back to Iowa.
All of this has obviously changed me forever. There's no way it couldn't. But having the kids to focus on That helps me a lot.
By the time Shauna Williams turned 40, she was used to starting over. After getting pregnant and married at the young age of 20, Shauna and her husband had settled in Goldsboro, North Carolina.
We were married very young. We stayed married 8 years. Decided to go in separate directions.
So in 2004, when a family member in Richmond, Virginia became ill and needed her support, Shauna found herself freshly divorced and planting new roots with her daughter, Lauren.
I was working full-time as a medical assistant. I just started going to school, but I did still miss the family and friends that we left behind in North Carolina. So we would travel back on weekends and holidays.
On one of her visits in April 2009, Shauna was thrilled when she heard from her old friend, Sean Williams.
Actually, I'm in town this weekend, and I was wondering if you wanted to hook up and grab a drink or something.
I remembered Sean because he went to high school with my brother. It had just been such a long time since we had seen each other, but I was looking forward to catching up.
How about coffee? Everybody meets for coffee now. That'd be great.
Yeah, coffee would be nice.
Now an active duty Army Staff Sergeant stationed in Fort Gordon, Georgia, Sean had clearly transformed into a man.
He'd gotten a lot taller, a little more distinguished.
And he was about to surprise Shauna with a tender confession.
He told me how much he missed me and told me that he's been in love with me since he was 15.
I know. I just knew one day that you'd be my wife.
It was very flattering.
Today's the first day.
But I didn't feel attracted to Sean.
But Sean, I don't know.
He really wasn't my type.
Still, when she returned to Richmond, Shauna found herself chatting with her Army admirer almost every night.
The more I learned about Sean and what his goals and his dreams were, I realized that they were very similar to mine.
I want to travel, buy a house, settle down.
I want the same things too, you know?
And I started looking at him differently.
Soon, Sean was making regular visits from Fort Gordon to Richmond to visit Shauna.
Things happened pretty fast. The times that we did spend together were amazing, and we just agreed that we wanted to take it to the next level.
Would you consider getting married again?
Oh, yeah. I get married again.
Really?
Yeah.
I really felt that Sean made Mom happy. Just the look on her face, she was smiling more often and just seemed really bubbly. So I was like, okay, that's good.
After her experience of getting pregnant at a young age, Shauna was determined not to take any chances.
So Sean and I made a mutual agreement that we would not be intimate prior to our wedding night. And we both decided to have STD testing done prior to the wedding.
A few days later, Sean arrived in Richmond for their big day.
I showed Sean my test results, and he said that his tests were negative.
You know, the military, they test us every 3 months, so.
And I was okay with that.
I love you. Love you back.
After nearly 7 months together, Shauna Williams married Sean Williams, and she didn't even have to change her name.
I was happy for her. She had finally found someone that I knew was a good person and she could build a life with.
I couldn't wait to spend the rest of my life with him. I was the happiest I had ever been.
But her happiness wouldn't last long. When Shauna learned what lay beneath her husband's charming facade had the power to kill.
This is the kind of thing that you only see on television.
It was devastating. I mean, it was just gut-wrenching.
On September 3rd, 2009, Shauna Williams was excited to finally consummate her marriage with new husband, Army Sergeant Sean Williams.
Our wedding day was so special, and honestly, we were just exhausted. The big night that we were waiting for just didn't happen that night. And it didn't happen the next night, and the next night. And I would ask Sean, well, what's going on?
Honey, is everything okay? I mean...
He had said that he's waited for this since he was 15, and he was nervous.
I don't want to mess things up.
So we just took our time and waited until it just felt right for both of us.
Shortly after their wedding, Sean asked Shauna to move to Georgia, where he was stationed, leaving Shauna torn.
After discussing it, we both agreed that because I was still in school, that it would be best for me to stay in Richmond until after I graduated.
2 years.
I mean, it's gonna be a long 2 years, and I'm gonna
miss the hell out of you, but we'll be fine.
In the meantime, their love, trust, and frequent visits would sustain them. Sean always found sweet ways to stay connected with Shauna, even when he was working late at his second job as a bouncer at a local karaoke bar.
Sean would send funny pictures and text messages and would always tell me how much he missed me and how much he loved me.
But when graduation came and went, Shauna was dismayed to find Sean no longer seemed to view her move to Georgia as an urgent matter.
You're never gonna be able to find a job here. You should probably stay in Richmond.
It kind of struck me as a little strange, seeing as how we were still newlyweds. I just figured maybe it was the stress of his career.
Shauna found herself regretting her decision not to move to Georgia right away, especially when military life became even busier for Sean over the next few months.
I was disappointed. Sean didn't visit Richmond as much. The conversations we had on the phone had dwindled somewhat.
Call me back.
Shauna was kind of let down by that. She was wondering whether or not, he still wanted to be married, if there was something going on.
To her major relief, Sean seemed to regain his fire for her when he received a permanent change in station to Fort Bliss, Texas, and was able to get them off-post housing. On April 10th, 2012, Shauna was finally able to move in with her husband.
Mom was the happiest I've ever seen her. She was getting ready to start the next chapter of her life with her husband, so she was happy.
Shauna counted her blessings until one day that May.
Sean was not the neatest person in the world, so I wanted to clean his car while he was at work and throwing away the bottles and potato chip bags.
Shauna was all too happy to be doing the things she felt a good wife should do, until she stumbled upon something that would make her think twice.
I see something sticking out the driver's side door. I was speechless. I didn't know what to believe.
Oh my God.
That was the beginning of her nightmare.
In the spring of 2012, while cleaning out her husband Sean's car, Shauna Williams was shocked at what she found.
I noticed that there was a box of condoms on the driver's side door. And we're a newly married couple that didn't use condoms.
What the hell are these?
And he said that they were in the car that he had purchased before, and things from that car just got transferred to this car. It was just a mistake.
Does it?
Shauna wasn't sure what to think. but decided to keep an eye out for anything else suspicious before jumping to conclusions. So over the next few months, Shauna focused on integrating herself into Sean's life.
Sean suggested we have some of his military colleagues over for dinner and drinks. And I figured that this was a perfect opportunity for me to experience being a military wife.
The party was going swimmingly.
I'm so glad you were able to make it. It's so nice to meet you.
Until Sean left to give someone a ride home.
I noticed that Sean left his phone. It started to ring. I just assumed that it was him looking for his phone. So I picked it up.
Hello?
And it was a woman.
I'm looking for Sean. Who is this?
This is Sean's wife. Who is this?
She immediately hung up.
She just had this nagging feeling that there was something going on. So she went through his phone.
There were numerous text messages and pictures of other women. He's proposing to other women. I found pictures of half-naked women. Everything that Sean told me, he's now telling multiple other women. I was floored.
When Sean returned home a few minutes later, Shauna was hell-bent on finding out just what was going on.
I think I just left my phone.
Oh yeah, you left your phone, all right. And you're not gonna get it back, Sean, until you tell me what the hell is going on.
Whoa, what are you talking about?
What do you mean, what am I talking about?
I said, no, you need to explain why these text messages and these photos are in your phone. Sean admitted that the text messages were very inappropriate and said that he decided to entertain other conversations until I moved from Richmond.
What happened again?
He said, please don't leave me. I love you. I'm sorry. It was wrong.
It was stupid, but I swear to God, I was lonely.
As difficult as it was, Shauna decided to try and forgive her husband.
I loved my husband, and I wanted this to work and was willing to confront it, correct him, but to just move on.
Still, as much as Shauna wanted to move past what she had found, she simply couldn't. The idea of catching Sean in his lies consumed her.
I turned into an investigator. I went through his personal items looking for any sign that this behavior is still going on.
It wasn't until that July, while Sean was at work, when Shauna spotted something suspicious.
The papers were stuffed in the glove compartment. So I went in the bathroom with the papers.
And the very first words Shauna read, there in black and white, knocked the breath right out of her.
I was stunned. I was floored.
This man is a sociopath and a predator.
I couldn't breathe. I started to shake. I think in that moment, my heart stopped.
In July of 2012, Shauna Williams stumbled upon something shocking in her husband's car.
I saw that they were medical records. 2 words on those medical records jumped out at me. They were herpes and HIV.
Not only did Sean have HIV, but he had known his status for 6 years.
You know, the military, they test us every 3 months.
The medical records dated back to 2006, 3 years before we were married. I couldn't breathe. I started to shake.
Shauna was determined to be tested as soon as possible.
My initial HIV test was done at the military hospital. When I asked how long it would take, they said 10 days, which was gonna be the longest 10 days of my life.
Are you Shauna?
The next several hours were a blur as Shauna met with military lawyers and investigators to report her husband's deception.
One of the questions the military personnel asked was if I had knowledge of anyone else that Sean was involved with.
Having sexual relations with anybody else?
And I remembered then that I still had his phone.
Military police brought Sean to headquarters while they investigated and placed him in military barracks.
All I thought about was, oh my God, am I going to die? And I was scared, more scared than I've ever been in my life.
Finally, after 10 days, Shauna learned her test results.
She said, you're HIV negative. And I was so relieved.
But relief soon turned to fear when Shauna remembered it could take up to a year for the virus to develop.
This means you do need continued testing.
Okay. As Shauna tried to come to grips with what had happened, she couldn't help but pore over her history with Sean.
The fact that I had my lab results and that he didn't have his, the condoms in his car, the multiple text messages and pictures. Looking back, the red flags were there. I think my heart just chose not to pick up on them.
Shauna had so many questions, and in late August, she finally had the chance to ask Sean through a military-arranged meeting.
Why would you do this to me? To me?
Because I love you, Shauna, and I didn't want to lose you.
He still stuck to his story that he was never unfaithful.
I don't believe.
I'm telling you the truth.
Unfortunately, holding Sean accountable would prove to be a long and daunting process. It wasn't until November 2013 when Shauna finally heard from a JAG prosecutor. Thanks to the contents of Sean's phone, they'd been able to confirm Sean had failed to inform 7 other women of his HIV status. One of his victims, Alicia Clark, met him in 2009 in Georgia.
I first met Sean when I had gone out to a local karaoke bar. He started flirting with me, and over the course of a few weeks, he got a little more persistent. You know, he started walking me to my car. He would tell me that he was in love with me and that he wanted to marry me.
You're the love of my life.
We started discussing things possibly being taken to a physical level. So I asked him, how often are you tested for STDs?
Oh, I get the military, they test me every 3 months.
Oh.
We were all shocked. I think Sean went into the military, and when he realized how much women like a man in uniform, he just went off the deep end.
Luckily, none of the women were infected, but there was no telling how many more had been exposed. On September 9th, 2014, Sean Williams pleaded guilty to 8 counts of aggravated assault, 6 counts of adultery, and 1 count of disobeying direct orders. He was dishonorably discharged from the Army and received an 8-year federal prison sentence.
It was very hurtful and emotional to know that someone that I fell in love with deeply could hurt me in such a devastating way.
Today, Shauna is starting over again. Even though for the last 2 years she has tested negative for HIV, her ordeal still weighs heavily on her.
I'm different. I don't easily trust people the way that I used to.
But with each day, Shauna believes that God spared her health and gave her strength to live her life to the fullest.
Shauna's made a lot of steps moving forward. I'm noticing a calmness coming over, and she's starting to smile a little bit more.
Life today is much better. And I have a wonderful, supportive family, and my friends have been amazing. And with that network that I have, it can't get anything but better.
When we think of the islands of Hawaii, our minds often drift toward the idyllic and the serene. We picture the endless stretch of azure ocean, the gentle sway of palm trees, and a pervasive sense of paradise that seems to exist entirely separate from the frantic, heavy burdens of the mainland. It is a place that promises an escape, a sanctuary where the sun dictates the rhythm of the day and the isolation of the archipelago offers a buffer against the complexities of modern life. But this postcard version of reality is merely a surface reflection. Beneath that brilliant sun lies a profound isolation, and within that isolation, human nature remains as intricate, as fragile, and occasionally as volatile as it is anywhere else on Earth. For the communities that call these islands home, the geographical separation does not erase the weight of history, culture, or the deep psychological pressures that individuals carry within them. In fact, the closed, tight-knit nature of island life can sometimes act as a pressure cooker, amplifying expectations and magnifying the consequences of every action. When cultural traditions intersect with unseen biological vulnerabilities, the results can shatter the illusion of paradise and leave a community grappling with questions that have no easy answers. In the year 1981, the Hawaiian island chain was violently shaken out of its tranquil rhythm. A crime occurred that was so brutal, so seemingly devoid of a rational motive, that it captured the attention of the entire state and sent shockwaves through the local population. The perpetrator was a man named Sattel, and his actions resulted in a double homicide that would not only devastate families, but also force the American criminal justice system to confront the profound complexities of human behavior, neurobiology, and cultural anthropology. This was not a simple case of a robbery gone wrong or a calculated act of revenge. It was an explosion of extreme, bloody violence that seemed to emerge from a void, leaving 2 people dead and a community demanding to know how such a nightmare could unfold in their midst. To understand the sheer magnitude of this tragedy, we must first look beyond the crime scene itself and delve deep into the invisible forces that were acting upon Sattel long before the fatal moment arrived. We must examine the invisible architecture of his world, a world defined by the intersection of ancestral tradition and the fragile physical structure of the human brain. The backdrop to this devastating event is the story of migration and the preservation of identity. Sattel belonged to the Samoan community, a vibrant and deeply traditional people, many of whom had migrated to Hawaii seeking new opportunities while striving to maintain their cultural heritage in a new land. Moving across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean does not mean leaving one's culture behind. For the Samoan diaspora living in Hawaii, the customs, the social hierarchies, and the ancient ways of organizing life were carefully packed and carried over the waves, meticulously reconstructed in their new island home. Among these traditions, none was more central, more powerful, or more absolute than the Matai system. The Matai system is the traditional chiefly framework of Samoan society, a complex and deeply ingrained social structure where the family leader, or Matai, holds ultimate authority. This is not merely a symbolic title. The Matai possesses absolute power over the economic resources, the social standing, and the spiritual well-being of every single member within the extended family. To live under the Matai system is to exist within a collective identity where the concept of the individual is entirely secondary to the honor, the survival, and the reputation of the lineage. Every action taken by a family member reflects back upon the Matai and the family as a whole. For those living within the isolated, insulated confines of an island community, this dynamic creates a profound sense of belonging and protection, but it also generates an immense, sometimes suffocating, psychological weight. The pressure to conform, to obey without question, and to uphold the honor of the family is absolute. For an individual who finds themselves unable to meet these rigid expectations, The resulting internal conflict can be catastrophic. The fear of disappointing the Matai, the terror of bringing shame to the bloodline, or the threat of being outcast from the only support system they have ever known can push a person into a state of severe psychological crisis. This cultural framework, while providing unity and strength for many, can become an inescapable psychological cage for someone whose mind is already fracturing under the strain of unseen burdens. In the case of Satel, the oppressive weight of these cultural expectations was not the only force at play. As the investigation into the horrific double murder would eventually reveal, Satel was fighting a battle that was entirely invisible to the outside world, a battle located deep within the physical tissues of his own mind. When we speak of criminal behavior, society is often quick to seek out logical motivations like greed, jealousy, or vengeance. Even when we consider mental instability, we tend to think in terms of functional psychiatric disorders, the emotional traumas and chemical imbalances that cloud judgment. But Satel's reality was fundamentally different, rooted in something far more tangible and far more devastating. The human brain is a delicate, intricate organ, and the structures that govern our most essential human traits, our ability to reason, to feel empathy, and to control our basest urges, are incredibly fragile. Through the meticulous work of forensic psychiatry, it would later be uncovered that Satel suffered from severe, organic brain damage. This was not a fleeting emotional breakdown or a functional psychological illness. This was a physical, structural compromise of his brain. The precise origins of such damage can vary, sometimes resulting from a traumatic head injury sustained years prior, sometimes from the prolonged exposure to and abuse of toxic substances, or occasionally from congenital defects present since birth. Regardless of the origin, the physical reality of the damage remains the same. In Satel's mind, the specific area compromised was the frontal lobe, the region of the brain that acts as the ultimate supervisor of human behavior. The frontal lobe is responsible for impulse control, for evaluating the consequences of an action, and for applying the brakes when primal, violent instincts begin to surge. When this area is physically damaged, the braking system fails. Imagine the terrifying reality of existing within a high-pressure cultural environment, carrying the massive burden of the Matai system's expectations, terrified of failure and dishonor, all while possessing a brain that is literally incapable of managing stress or suppressing violent impulses. The damage to Satel's frontal lobe meant that when faced with extreme psychological agitation, he was stripped of the biological mechanism required to stop himself. The capacity to self-regulate, to step back from the edge of the abyss, was physically absent. This intersection of immense external cultural pressure and profound internal biological failure created a perfect, invisible storm. It was a storm that gathered silently within him, undetected by those around him, until it finally broke in 1981 with catastrophic and deadly consequences. When the violence finally erupted, it was absolute. Satel lashed out in a frenzy of destruction that claimed 2 lives, leaving a gruesome scene that would haunt the first responders and the community for decades. The brutal nature of the double homicide stood in stark contrast to the quiet surroundings, a jarring intrusion of profound darkness into the sunlit world of the Hawaiian Islands. In the immediate aftermath, there was only shock, grief, and a desperate search for answers. How could a man commit such a blood-soaked act against 2 human beings? The public demanded justice, and the initial reaction was one of pure condemnation, seeking the harshest possible penalties for a crime that seemed entirely unprovoked and deeply malicious. However, as the dust settled and the legal process slowly began to grind into motion, the true complexity of the tragedy started to emerge from the shadows. This case was destined to become far more than a standard murder trial. It would evolve into a landmark exploration of the human condition, testing the boundaries of the justice system and forcing a rigid legal framework to bend and accommodate the profound realities of both anthropology and neuroscience. It would demand that the court look past the horrifying end result and peer directly into the damaged mind of the perpetrator, navigating the incredibly difficult terrain between moral culpability and biological determinism. The story of Satel is not just the story of a double murder. It is a profound, tragic study of what happens when the absolute demands of a traditional culture collide with the broken physical machinery of a human brain, resulting in a devastating loss of life and a legal reckoning that would change the understanding of forensic psychiatry forever. To understand the true weight of the tragedy that unfolded in 1981, it is imperative to first immerse ourselves in the specific, insulated world that these individuals inhabited. In true crime, we often look for straightforward narratives of good and evil, predator and prey, but reality is rarely so cleanly divided. Reality is shaped by geography, by history, and by the heavy, invisible hand of culture. The setting of this double homicide, the Hawaiian Islands, plays a role as crucial as any physical evidence found at the scene. In the early 1980s, Hawaii was navigating a complex identity. On one hand, it was the 50th American state, a booming hub of tourism and military presence, outwardly projecting an image of modern, sun-drenched prosperity. On the other hand, it was an archipelago of profoundly isolated landmasses in the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean, home to diverse indigenous and immigrant populations who lived lives entirely detached from the glossy brochures found in hotel lobbies. For the communities residing outside the immediate glow of the tourist districts, life was defined by a different set of rules, dictated by deep-rooted traditions and the practical necessities of living in a closed, geographically restricted environment. Within this multifaceted landscape existed the Samoan diaspora, a vibrant and deeply traditional community that had carried its ancient heritage across the ocean to the shores of Hawaii. The victims of this devastating crime were integral threads in the delicate fabric of this specific community. While the clinical details of the crime scene would later dominate the forensic reports, it is essential to remember that before they were reduced to the status of victims in a legal document, they were living, breathing participants in a complex social ecosystem. They woke up to the same tropical sun, navigated the same economic challenges, and, most importantly, operated under the same heavy canopy of cultural expectations as everyone else in their neighborhood. In a tight-knit immigrant community, an individual is rarely just an individual. They are a representative of their family, a link in a generational chain, and a subject within a highly structured hierarchy. The sudden, violent erasure of two such lives does not merely end two personal narratives. It tears a gaping hole in the community itself, disrupting the social order and leaving a legacy of profound, collective trauma. To grasp the environment surrounding the victims and the perpetrator alike, we must examine the cornerstone of their social reality, the Matai system. This traditional Samoan chiefly framework is not an artifact of the past, relegated to history books or ceremonial occasions. In 1981, just as it is today, the Matai system was a living, breathing institution that governed the daily existence of its people. For those who belong to this culture, the family is not simply a nuclear unit of parents and children. It is an expansive, interconnected network of relatives, all unified under the ultimate authority of the Matai, the chosen chief. This system represents a deeply collective way of moving through the world. The Matai holds absolute power over the extended family's economic resources, social standing, and spiritual direction. They are the ultimate arbiter of disputes, the manager of communal wealth, and the custodian of the family's honor. It is a system built on profound mutual reliance, designed to ensure the survival and prosperity of the group in environments where individualism could mean vulnerability. For the victims living within this framework, the Matai system would have provided a profound sense of belonging, an unshakable safety net that guaranteed no one was ever truly alone. However, this immense communal support comes at a steep psychological price. The environment it creates is characterized by intense, unyielding pressure. In a closed island community, where anonymity is entirely impossible and every family's standing is constantly observed and evaluated by their neighbors, the pressure to conform is absolute. The expectations placed upon every member of the lineage are enormous. You are expected to contribute to the family's wealth, to obey the directives of the Matai without hesitation or dissent, and above all, to fiercely protect the family's reputation. There is no room for quiet rebellion or personal deviation. The honor of the family is a fragile, precious commodity, and the actions of a single individual can elevate or completely destroy that honor in the eyes of the entire community. This dynamic transforms the island environment into a psychological pressure cooker. The geographical isolation of Hawaii mirrors the social isolation of the tight-knit community. When the ocean surrounds you on all sides, and the social structures of your culture surround you from within, there is quite literally nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. For the victims, their daily lives would have been a constant balancing act of fulfilling personal needs while navigating these immense structural expectations. They were people who understood the unspoken rules of their world, the severe consequences of bringing shame to the lineage, and the absolute necessity of maintaining harmony within the complex web of family relations. It is within this incredibly dense, highly charged social atmosphere that the events of 1981 began to take shape. The tragedy that befell them was not a random act of street violence committed by a stranger in the dark. It was a localized eruption of violence within a closed system, making the breach of trust and the resulting devastation all the more profound. When we consider the victims, we must afford them the dignity of understanding their context. They were not mere collateral damage. They were people deeply embedded in a system that demanded loyalty, respect, and duty. The suddenness of their deaths stands in horrific contrast to the ordered, hierarchical world they inhabited. In an environment where the Matai dictates order and the preservation of the family is the highest priority, a chaotic, bloody double murder is not just a crime. It is an unthinkable violation of the most sacred cultural norms. It is a profound disruption of the spiritual and social harmony that the entire community strives to maintain. The loss of these two individuals meant the severing of economic contributions, the breaking of emotional bonds, and a violent shock to the collective psyche of a people already navigating the complex waters of life in a diaspora. The grief experienced by their families would have been magnified 100-fold by the communal nature of their existence. The mourning would not have been private. It would have been a public, collective agony, felt deeply by every member of the extended lineage and recognized by the community at large. Furthermore, analyzing this background forces us to acknowledge the invisible struggles that occur within marginalized or insulated groups. The justice system, built largely upon Western concepts of individualism and personal autonomy, often struggles to comprehend the profound weight of a system like the Matai. For an outsider looking at the sunny shores of Hawaii, the intense, suffocating pressure of an immigrant community's internal politics is completely invisible. But for the victims, and indeed for the perpetrator, this pressure was as real and as tangible as the ground beneath their feet. It dictated their choices, fueled their anxieties, and shaped their reality. To understand the crime, one must understand that the victims lived in a world where failure to meet cultural expectations was not just a personal disappointment, it was a catastrophic spiritual and social failing. The fear of being outcast, of being the one responsible for the ruin of the family's name, creates an undercurrent of tension that runs through every interaction. The victims of this brutal act of violence were navigating this exact tension every day of their lives. Their stories were abruptly and violently cut short, leaving behind a silence that echoed loudly through their community. We do not need to know the intimate details of their daily routines to understand the profound tragedy of their loss. We know they were part of a people who value connection above all else, who view themselves as indispensable parts of a greater whole. To be violently ripped from that whole is a fate that demands our deepest empathy. It highlights the vulnerability of the human condition, even when insulated by the thickest walls of cultural tradition and family support. The systems designed to protect us can also trap us, and the communities that provide our greatest strength can also be the source of our deepest anxieties. As we move forward to examine the horrific incident itself, we must carry the weight of this context with us. We must remember that the blood spilled in 1981 was not shed in a vacuum. It was shed on the soil of an island that serves as a crossroads of cultures, within a community bound tightly by ancient laws and unyielding expectations. The two lives lost were intimately connected to this world, subject to its beauties and its immense pressures. Their tragic end forces us to look closely at the fragile nature of order and the terrifying ease with which the human mind, under the right combination of cultural weight and biological vulnerability, can shatter that order completely. The victims deserved a life defined by the supportive embrace of their culture, not a death that would become a grim case study in forensic psychiatry. Their memory demands that we look at this case not just as a fascinating legal anomaly, but as a profound human tragedy rooted in the very real, very heavy complexities of living under the absolute authority of a system that permits no failure and forgives no weakness. The day of the tragic incident in 1981 began with the deceptive normalcy that so often precedes profound tragedy in tight-knit communities where the routines of daily life mask the turbulent, unseen currents swirling beneath the surface. In the sunlit environment of the Hawaiian Islands, the morning would have unfolded just like any other, characterized by the gentle rhythms of local life and the collective obligations that bound the Samoan diaspora together under the watchful invisible gaze of the traditional Matai system. The two victims whose lives were about to be abruptly and violently extinguished were entirely unaware of the catastrophic storm gathering momentum in their immediate vicinity. They were individuals deeply embedded in their cultural framework, carrying out their responsibilities and navigating the complex social hierarchies that define their existence, without any premonition that they were about to become the center of one of the most brutal and medically significant homicide cases in the history of the state. For them, the day was meant to be another thread in the continuous fabric of their family lineage, a series of mundane interactions and shared duties that reinforce the bonds of their community. But human existence is terribly fragile, and the safety we perceive in our surroundings is often an illusion shattered not by external invading forces, but by the internal collapse of the human mind. To comprehend the sheer suddenness and the unfathomable brutality of the violence that erupted that day, one must look away from the victims for a moment and peer into the fractured reality of the perpetrator, Sattel, whose mind was becoming a prison of immense, unbearable pressure. The tragedy did not begin with a raised voice, a heated argument, or a premeditated plan for revenge. It began silently on a microscopic neurological level deep within the delicate structures of his brain, where a critical physical failure was cascading toward a point of no return. As forensic psychiatrists would later painstakingly prove, the organic brain damage Sattel suffered from had critically compromised his frontal lobe, the exact region responsible for executive function, moral reasoning, and crucial for survival, the ability to control impulsive behavior. Imagine a heavily loaded vehicle navigating a steep, treacherous downward slope only to discover that the braking mechanism has completely physically disintegrated. That is the biological reality of what was happening inside Sattel as he moved through the hours leading up to the double homicide. The immense, unyielding psychological pressure of his cultural environment, the demand to uphold the honor of the family, the terror of failing the Matai, and the suffocating weight of communal expectations were acting as the gravitational force pulling that vehicle down the mountain. In a healthy brain, the frontal lobe would process this immense stress, deploy coping mechanisms, rationalize the anxiety, and suppress any primal urges to lash out violently. But his brain was fundamentally broken. The damage was not a mood swing or a temporary emotional breakdown. It was a tangible physical deficit that rendered him biologically incapable of stopping the violent impulses that were beginning to surge within him. As the pressure mounted, the damaged tissues in his brain simply could not contain the escalating neurological storm, resulting in a complete and catastrophic loss of behavioral control. The precise trigger for the violence remains obscured by the chaos of the event, but in cases of severe organic brain damage combined with extreme environmental stress, a trigger does not need to be a profound insult or a direct physical threat. It can be something entirely mundane, a perceived slight, a momentary confusion, or simply the internal breaking point where the damaged mind can no longer process the crushing weight of existence. When the violence finally erupted, it did not unfold like a calculated crime. It exploded like a force of nature, a sudden, blind, and absolute frenzy that offered no warning and allowed no opportunity for escape. The two victims were suddenly confronted not with a rational human being they recognized, but with an overwhelming tide of uninhibited aggression. The brutality of the attack was characterized by its sheer senselessness and the horrifying intensity of the physical force utilized, reflecting a complete detachment from reality and a total absence of the internal restraints that govern human interaction. This was not a robbery where the goal is property. This was not a calculated assassination where the goal is a specific outcome. This was a terrifying psychotic break manifesting as pure, unfiltered physical destruction. The victims, caught entirely off guard in what should have been a safe environment, experienced an unimaginable terror as the sudden storm of violence consumed them. We must center our empathy on their final moments, acknowledging the profound injustice of their sudden end. They were stripped of their futures, their loving families, and their lives in a matter of minutes, falling victim to a biological and cultural collision they could not possibly have foreseen or defended against. The frenzy of the attack left the immediate surroundings drenched in the physical evidence of the tragedy, a chaotic, bloody tableau that stood in horrifying contrast to the quiet tropical world outside. As Sattel lashed out again and again, the concept of morality, the understanding of right and wrong, and the awareness of the catastrophic consequences of his actions were entirely absent from his mind. According to the rigid legal frameworks that determine sanity, he was in that exact moment completely detached from the nature and quality of his acts. He did not know what he was doing, and even if some fragmented part of his consciousness perceived the physical motions, he was entirely incapable of understanding that those motions were morally and legally wrong. He was a passenger in a fundamentally broken vessel, driven entirely by misfiring neurons and the unbearable, overwhelming pressure of a cultural identity he could no longer mentally support. When the physical exertion of the violent frenzy finally exhausted itself, the silence that descended upon the bloody scene was absolute and deafening. It was the heavy, suffocating silence that follows a devastating impact, a void where two vibrant lives had existed just moments before. In the immediate aftermath, Sattel did not exhibit the behaviors of a calculated criminal who understands the magnitude of their guilt. There was no sophisticated attempt to conceal the bodies, no desperate effort to scrub the environment clean of forensic evidence, and no rational plan to evade the authorities who would inevitably arrive. Instead, there was likely only profound confusion, a blankness that often accompanies the end of a severe psychotic episode driven by organic brain damage. The mind, having violently expelled the unbearable pressure, often resets into a state of disjointed detachment, leaving the perpetrators standing amid the wreckage without a coherent understanding of the reality they have just permanently altered. The discovery of the crime scene shattered the peaceful illusion of the neighborhood forever. When the first responders eventually arrived, called perhaps by a concerned neighbor who heard the unnatural sounds of the struggle or by a family member expecting a routine visit, they were entirely unprepared for the sheer scale of the carnage that awaited them. Law enforcement officers and medical emergency personnel who are trained to handle the darkest aspects of human nature found themselves deeply unsettled by the horrific nature of the double homicide. The visual impact of the scene immediately communicated that this was an event of extraordinary violence born out of a profound and terrifying instability. The physical evidence, the blood, the disarray, the terrible final positions of the victims painted a vivid, undeniable picture of a sudden, uncontrollable frenzy. As the police secured the perimeter and the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles cast long, unsettling shadows across the beautiful Hawaiian landscape, the news of the shocking tragedy began to ripple outward, tearing through the tight-knit Samoan community and sending waves of shock and horror across the island. The collective grief was instantaneous and overwhelming as families realized that two of their own had been slaughtered in an act of violence that defied all logical explanation. In the hours and days that followed, the community would be paralyzed by a desperate, agonizing need to understand why. They would search for traditional motives, looking for hidden animosities or secret debts, but they would find nothing that could possibly justify the sheer magnitude of the bloody slaughter. The true answer, the devastating intersection of the absolute demands of the traditional Matai system and the microscopic physical failure of his frontal lobe, was still hidden, waiting to be uncovered by the complex and unprecedented legal and medical investigations that were about to commence. But in those agonizing first hours, there was only the profound, unutterable grief for the two victims who had been so brutally taken, and the chilling, terrifying realization that the human mind, under the right invisible pressures, can suddenly, and without warning, transform a familiar face into an instrument of absolute and lethal destruction. The sheer trauma inflicted upon the immediate families of the deceased and the wider community was a heavy burden that would permanently alter their perception of safety and trust within their own circles. As the bodies were respectfully removed from the devastating scene, the weight of the investigation began to shift toward the perplexing mind of the perpetrator, setting the stage for a profound legal battle that would force society to confront the uncomfortable reality that sometimes the most monstrous acts are not born of evil intent, but rather emerge from the tragic, catastrophic failure of the human brain itself, forever changing history. Following the discovery of the horrific double homicide, the immediate atmosphere in the Hawaiian community shifted from pure shock to a desperate, methodical drive for answers. The authorities were tasked with the unenviable responsibility of dissecting a crime that felt fundamentally incompatible with the reality of the people involved. Initial police interviews and the collection of physical evidence at the scene provided a grim roadmap of the violence, yet they failed to explain the inner motivations of the perpetrator, Sattel. For the investigators and prosecutors, the primary challenge was to bridge the gap between the chaotic, bloody reality of the crime scene and the legal necessity of proving intent. In the American justice system, a murder conviction typically requires establishing mens rea, a guilty mind, or the intent to commit a criminal act. However, as the investigation deepened, it became increasingly apparent that the standard labels of malice, premeditation, or cold-blooded planning were insufficient to describe what had occurred. The police began to reconstruct the timeline, looking not just at the final, fatal minutes, but at the days and weeks preceding the incident. They spoke with members of the community, family associates, and those who had interacted with Sattel within the strict, demanding hierarchy of the Matai system. The information gathered painted a picture of a man laboring under the heavy, invisible burden of profound social expectations. Yet, this context, while culturally illuminating, did not in itself constitute a legal defense. The investigators needed to look deeper into the biological and neurological evidence that would soon become the cornerstone of the trial. As they compiled their findings, they faced a complex web of cultural norms and personal history that suggested Sattel's actions were not the product of a rational, criminal mind, but rather the manifestation of a profound systemic collapse. The investigation moved forward with a realization that this case required experts who could look beyond the outward behavior and into the internal biological mechanics that governed human decision-making. As the prosecution prepared their case, the defense began to assemble a team of specialists in forensic psychiatry and neuroscience. This was a critical turning point where the investigation transitioned from a standard criminal inquiry into a complex study of human pathology. The defense attorneys recognized that the key to understanding Sattel lay not in the motive, which remained elusive and fragmented, but in the structural integrity of his brain. They sought to document, through medical imaging and psychological evaluation, the physical reality of his brain damage. This was a meticulous, scientific endeavor that required the use of advanced medical technology to demonstrate, with clinical precision, the lesions and structural deficiencies within Sattel's frontal lobe. The experts interviewed by the defense explained that the frontal lobe is the conductor of the human behavioral orchestra. It manages the interplay between impulses and societal rules. When this conductor is missing, the music of human behavior does not just slow down or become discordant. It breaks into uncontrollable, chaotic noise. The evidence gathered by the defense team began to systematically dismantle the prosecution's initial assumption of a calculated killer. They brought in evidence of potential prior head trauma, an analysis of the environmental stressors he had been subjected to, and the long-term impacts of living in an isolated, high-pressure cultural environment. Each step of the investigation, every piece of data collected, served to underscore the disconnect between Sattel's internal state and the external social reality. The investigators faced the daunting task of explaining to a court and a public, conditioned to believe in individual agency, that Sattel had been robbed of that very agency by his own biological fragility. The interrogation of witnesses revealed a man who had become increasingly erratic, a man whose ability to communicate effectively and maintain the facade of a conforming family member had been deteriorating over time. This deterioration was not a moral failure. It was a symptom of a mind that was quite literally failing to support its own operation. When the investigators revisited the crime scene with these psychiatric insights in mind, the scene itself began to speak a different language. The excessive, uncoordinated violence, the lack of a clear exit strategy, and the blank, hollow state in which Sattel was found, all converged to support the theory of a profound psychological break. The investigators found themselves navigating a delicate balance, having to prove the occurrence of a heinous crime while simultaneously building a record that would acknowledge the perpetrator's lack of true cognitive control. The investigators were essentially constructing a case that could handle the weight of two realities: the objective, devastating fact of the deaths, and the subjective, medical reality of the perpetrator's internal destruction. This process was not without its difficulties. The victims' families and the wider community, understandably desperate for closure and a sense of justice that felt proportionate to their loss, were often baffled and distressed by the emphasis on the perpetrator's mental health. They felt that the focus on neurology and psychiatry was an attempt to excuse a horrific act of violence, to strip away the responsibility of the perpetrator, and leave them without the solace of seeing him held accountable in a traditional, punitive way. The investigators had to walk a narrow, arduous path, honoring the victim's suffering while fulfilling their duty to uncover the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. The investigative process became an exercise in forensic diplomacy, requiring the delicate management of the judicial system's rigid requirements alongside the nuances of human science and cultural sensitivity. It was a process that demanded absolute accuracy, avoiding any temptation to embellish or simplify. Every piece of documentation, every psychiatric report, and every testimony regarding the impact of the Matai system had to be unimpeachable, for the court would scrutinize these findings with extreme rigor. As the investigation reached its conclusion, the picture that emerged was not of a villain acting out of malice, but of a broken individual acting out of a catastrophic, internally generated desperation. The evidence showed that the combination of his pre-existing organic brain damage and the crushing pressures of his environment had pushed him to a point where his capacity for voluntary, reasoned action had effectively ceased to exist. When the file was finally handed to the prosecutors, it was not merely a charge sheet. It was an extensive report that compelled the legal system to address the deeper, more complex questions of responsibility and pathology. This was the foundation upon which the subsequent legal proceedings would be built, a massive, exhaustive collection of facts that would eventually lead to one of the most landmark cases in the history of Hawaiian jurisprudence. The investigation had done more than just identify the perpetrator. It had forced the system to look directly into the void of the damaged human mind and acknowledge that, in some instances, the law must account for the reality that the perpetrator, on a biological level, was no longer in command of their own existence. This understanding, while profoundly difficult to accept for those who had suffered the most, was the only way to arrive at a resolution that was fundamentally grounded in medical and scientific truth, setting the stage for a trial that would forever change how the courts navigated the intersection of law, culture, and the fragile, often treacherous landscape of the human brain. The investigation had finished its work, leaving behind a legacy that transcended the specific tragedy of the 1981 case and opened the door to a new, more nuanced understanding of culpability and justice in the modern world. The trial of Sattel became a watershed moment for the Hawaiian judicial system, a high-stakes arena where the rigid structures of the law were forced to collide with the fluid, often unsettling, insights of neuroscience and cultural anthropology. As the courtroom doors opened, the atmosphere was thick with the weight of the tragedy. On one side sat the families of the victims, their presence a somber, constant reminder of the human cost of the crime, their eyes searching for a measure of justice that could acknowledge their profound, irreparable loss. On the other side stood Sattel, a figure who appeared diminished and detached, his physical presence in the dock providing a sharp contrast to the monstrous nature of his actions. The prosecution, representing the state's demand for order and accountability, began by laying out the visceral reality of the crime. They presented the evidence with a clinical, unsparing focus: the photos of the scene, the accounts of the struggle, and the overwhelming proof of the double homicide. Their case was built on the fundamental pillar of criminal law, that a person is responsible for their actions unless they are fundamentally unable to understand the nature of those actions or the difference between right and wrong. They argued that Sattel's actions, however inexplicable, were the result of a conscious human being who, in the moment of violence, had chosen to inflict death. They pushed for the court to recognize the gravity of the lives taken and the necessity of punishment as both a deterrent and a statement of the community's moral boundaries. The defense, however, introduced a different narrative, one that did not deny the reality of the crime but fundamentally recontextualized it. They did not present Sattel as a man who had chosen evil, but as a man who had suffered a biological catastrophe. This was where the trial evolved into an unprecedented struggle over the definition of insanity. The two psychiatrists brought to the stand were the linchpins of the entire proceeding. They provided testimony that was as fascinating as it was disturbing, breaking down the complex, unseen landscape of Sattel's brain. They walked the court through the evidence of organic brain damage, specifically focusing on the destruction of the frontal lobe. They utilized medical terminology that sounded cold and detached: lesions, executive dysfunction, impulse control, disinhibition, but the message they conveyed was deeply, terrifyingly human. They argued that the frontal lobe is the seat of the self in a social context. It is the mechanism that filters our base, aggressive impulses through the sieve of reason, culture, and empathy. They showed that for Sattel, this sieve had been physically obliterated. Under the intense, suffocating pressure of the Matai system, a cultural framework that demanded absolute, unquestioning adherence, his damaged brain could no longer function as a coherent, rational agent. The courtroom heard detailed accounts of how the specific, unrelenting expectations of the traditional Samoan hierarchy had acted as a constant, insurmountable stressor. For a healthy person, these expectations might be a source of pride or a heavy, manageable burden. For Sattel, they were a catalyst. The experts testified that at the moment of the homicides, the pressure had reached a critical threshold, triggering a biological explosion. Sattel was not, in the medical sense, making decisions. He was experiencing a total, psychotic collapse of his behavioral infrastructure. The defense invoked the Mnatin Rule and the Model Penal Code standards, arguing that Sattel simply did not meet the criteria for legal culpability. They contended that he did not possess the cognitive capacity to understand the moral depravity of his actions at the time of the event. He was not a man making a choice. He was a man witnessing his own mind unravel and, in that chaos, becoming an instrument of violence. The testimony was grueling, forcing the jury and the judge to look past the blood on the floor and into the microscopic, fractured world of neurons and chemical signals. Throughout the testimony, the tension in the room was palpable. The victims' families watched, clearly pained by the clinical, scientific deconstruction of a crime that felt to them like a simple, pure evil. There is a profound, inherent struggle when a legal system attempts to reconcile the cold reality of science with the raw, emotional demand for justice. The prosecution attempted to cross-examine the experts, trying to find cracks in their assessment, questioning whether the brain damage was truly enough to strip away all agency, or if it was merely a contributing factor that didn't negate moral responsibility. They painted a picture of a man who, despite his injuries, was still a member of a community, a man who functioned in the world, and who therefore should be held responsible for the consequences of his violence. It was a clash between the binary, black and white world of legal guilt and the infinite, murky gray area of psychiatric health. The judge and jury were tasked with an impossible burden. They had to decide whether to punish a man whose mind was objectively broken or to institutionalize him in a way that acknowledged his fundamental inability to function within society. As the proceedings drew to a close, the final arguments reflected the weight of the task at hand. The defense made a final, impassioned plea for the recognition of human fragility. They asked the court to see that sentencing a man like Sattel to a standard prison term, where his condition would likely deteriorate further and where he would have no access to the necessary medical oversight, would be a gross miscarriage of justice. They framed the insanity plea not as an escape from justice, but as the only appropriate path toward a treatment-based outcome that acknowledged the reality of his brain pathology. The prosecution argued one last time for the protection of society and the sanctity of the lives lost, emphasizing that a diagnosis of brain damage must not become a blanket excuse for the commission of capital crimes. The jury retreated to deliberate, and the silence in the courtroom during those hours was heavy with the expectation of a verdict that would resonate far beyond the confines of the building. When the verdict was finally announced, not guilty by reason of insanity, the reaction was complex. For many, it was a moment of profound relief that the court had chosen to accept the scientific evidence of the perpetrator's biological state. For others, particularly the families of the victims, it was a source of continued, agonizing frustration. They felt that justice had been diverted, that the focus had shifted away from the lives that were extinguished and toward the pathology of the person who had ended them. However, the judge's decision to commit Sattel to the high-security ward of the Hawaii State Hospital was a crucial component of the verdict. It was not a walk to freedom. It was a transition from the public, confrontational arena of a criminal trial into the controlled, restrictive, and long-term environment of a psychiatric institution. The judge made it clear that this commitment was not a temporary measure. It was a recognition that Sattel would remain a danger as long as his brain was damaged and his impulse control was absent. The verdict was a testament to the court's willingness to integrate advanced forensic psychiatry into its decision-making, acknowledging that the law cannot function in isolation from the medical science that informs our understanding of human behavior. The trial did not provide a happy ending, for there is no such thing when two people have been killed in such a fashion. It did, however, provide a resolution that was fundamentally grounded in the intersection of biological reality and cultural awareness. As the gavel fell, it marked the end of the trial, but the beginning of a lifelong, highly monitored period of institutionalization for Sattel, one that would be defined by the very medical and psychiatric experts who had been the ones to testify to his profound brokenness. The case would be remembered not for the trial itself, but for the fundamental shift it caused in the legal perception of responsibility, forever changing the way that cases involving severe brain damage and cultural trauma would be navigated in the future, marking a profound and permanent evolution in the history of the law. The conclusion of the Sattel trial, resulting in a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, did not bring the finality that usually accompanies the closing of a criminal case. Instead, it marked the beginning of a prolonged, quiet, and deeply supervised existence for the perpetrator within the high-security walls of the Hawaii State Hospital. For the victims' families, this was a difficult resolution to process, as the legal system had seemingly prioritized the biological state of the offender over the finality of retribution. Yet, in the broader history of forensic psychiatry and legal jurisprudence, this case stands as a landmark, forcing a permanent shift in how society addresses the intersection of severe mental pathology and violent conduct. The long-term consequences of this case extend far beyond the institutional walls, providing a sobering reflection on the limits of human agency and the profound ethical dilemmas that arise when the law is forced to contend with the frailty of the human brain. The transition to the psychiatric facility was not a path to liberation, but a move into a specialized, monitored environment where Sattel's daily life became entirely dictated by the rigors of medical and behavioral intervention. Within the sterile, secure confines of the Hawaii State Hospital, the narrative of the case shifted from the dramatic intensity of the courtroom to the methodical, slow-paced process of psychiatric management. Sattel's reality was now defined by a regime of medication, therapy, and continuous observation, designed specifically to address the structural damage in his frontal lobe. Unlike the prison system, which focuses on punishment and the loss of liberty, the hospital's mission was to manage the potential for further violence. The medical staff were not jailers. They were clinicians tasked with the daunting responsibility of determining if a man whose brain had once failed him so catastrophically could ever be rendered safe enough to re-enter a society that had been permanently scarred by his actions. This process is inherently uncertain. The experts, having established the organic nature of his brain damage, now had to grapple with the reality that such injuries are often permanent. The goal was not to cure him in the sense of restoring him to a pre-incident state, but to implement a system of external controls, medication, constant supervision, and psychological support that could compensate for the missing internal braking mechanisms in his own mind. The case of Sattel serves as a harrowing case study in the reality of forensic institutionalization. It highlights the profound misconception that an insanity defense is an escape hatch. In truth, the duration of stay for individuals found not guilty by reason of insanity often exceeds the time they would have served had they been convicted of the crime. Satel's existence became a lifetime of confinement, a life lived under the constant, analytical gaze of doctors and forensic professionals. His personal history, the pressures of the Matai system, and the specific nature of his organic brain damage were not left behind. They were the foundation of his clinical record, the context through which every action, every response, and every day of his life was interpreted. The hospital became his new world, a space where the complexities of his life, his heritage, his traumatic history, and his violent potential were managed with a cold, clinical precision that replaced the emotional turmoil of the community he had left behind. Reflecting on the legacy of the Satel case, one cannot help but confront the uncomfortable reality of what it means to hold an individual accountable for actions committed while in the grip of a biological failure. The trial forced the judicial system to acknowledge that the traditional binary of innocence and guilt is inadequate when applied to the complexities of the human brain. It pushed the legal definition of responsibility into the realm of medical science, demanding that the court consider not just what a person did, but how their mind functioned at the moment of their action. This was a necessary, if deeply controversial, evolution in the history of the law. It ensured that we do not simply label a person a monster and close the case, but instead seek to understand the underlying causes of the violence, however disturbing those causes may be. By centering the role of organic brain damage, the case set a precedent for future legal battles where the defense could effectively argue that a defendant's capacity for reasoned action was compromised by physical deficits. However, this systemic shift comes with a lingering weight. The victims' families were left to navigate a world that had been forever changed, a world where the person who had ended their loved ones' lives was still alive, confined but breathing, while their own lives were defined by an absence that could never be filled. This is the enduring, tragic irony of the case. The psychiatric resolution, while scientifically sound and legally defensible within the framework of modern forensics, could never offer the emotional resolution that the survivor sought. The institutionalization of Satel served as a reminder that some tragedies are born of factors that cannot be fixed, only managed. The pressures of the Matai system, which had been so integral to the build-up of the tragedy, remained a powerful force in the community, a cultural reality that continued to shape the lives of those who remained. The case became a permanent part of the local history, a cautionary tale about the intersection of tradition, isolation, and the precariousness of the human condition. Looking back, the Satel case remains a cornerstone in the study of forensic psychiatry for its clarity and its unflinching honesty regarding the nature of criminal insanity. It did not attempt to romanticize the perpetrator, nor did it try to ignore the horrific nature of the double homicide. It presented the cold, hard facts of a catastrophic intersection, the pressure of cultural expectations colliding with a fundamentally broken brain. The legacy of the case is a testament to the fact that justice, when done correctly, is not just about retribution. It is about understanding. It is about the uncomfortable, necessary work of peeling back the layers of human behavior to reveal the sometimes terrifying mechanisms that govern our lives. By admitting that some individuals, due to biological injury, are truly incapable of the cognitive and moral control required by law, the justice system demonstrated a capacity for, and a commitment to, a more nuanced and scientific pursuit of the truth. The memory of the victims, however, must remain the central focus of any reflection on this tragedy. Their lives, their potential, and the profound, senseless void left in the wake of their deaths are the true measure of the cost of that day in 1981. The legal and medical complexities of the case, while significant, should never serve to diminish the loss of those two individuals. Their story is a reminder of the fragility of human existence and the sudden, unpredictable ways that the lives of the innocent can be consumed by forces beyond their comprehension. As we analyze the scientific and legal outcomes of the case, we must always anchor our understanding in the human reality of the crime itself. The path forward for any society dealing with such tragedies must be one that balances the pursuit of scientific truth with a deep, unwavering empathy for the survivors. The story of Sattel is finished in the courts and in the medical charts, but it persists as a profound, unsettling inquiry into the nature of human life, responsibility, and the unpredictable, often tragic ways that our biological and cultural realities shape our existence. It is a case that will continue to be debated, studied, and analyzed, serving as a permanent, stark reminder of the complexities inherent in the human experience and the eternal, agonizing quest for justice in a world that is so often fragile, incomprehensible, and tragically, permanently marked by the shadows of our past. The final silence that surrounds Sattel in his high-security ward is not a resolution, but a testament to the enduring, complex weight of a tragedy that continues to echo through time, challenging us all to look deeper into the shadows of the human mind and recognize the thin, fragile line that separates us from the edge of the abyss. The echoes of the Sattel case continue to resonate through the corridors of modern forensic psychiatry, serving as a permanent anchor for discussions regarding the limits of human autonomy and the intersection of cultural anthropology with clinical pathology. As time moves forward from that fateful day in 1981, the lessons derived from this tragedy have evolved from simple legal precedents into fundamental components of how we understand the complex architecture of criminal responsibility. The case is no longer just a memory of a specific, localized double homicide. It is a foundational study that forces us to confront the uncomfortable intersection of environmental pressure and biological determinism. By examining the specificities of Sattel's decline, legal scholars and medical professionals have been able to develop more nuanced frameworks for evaluating cases where the boundary between criminal intent and involuntary pathology is blurred by structural brain damage and intense social expectation. This evolution in thought represents a significant shift in the collective pursuit of justice, moving beyond a primitive need for vengeance toward a more sophisticated, albeit deeply unsettling, acknowledgement of the mechanical vulnerabilities inherent in the human condition. The institutionalization of Sattel within the Hawaii State Hospital became a lifelong commitment to the management of human instability, a reality that offers a stark, cold counterpoint to the dramatic narratives often found in true crime media. In the quiet, high-security isolation of the facility, the clinical record of his life continued to build, a silent archive of the ongoing failure of his cognitive infrastructure. For the professionals tasked with his care, the challenge was never to prepare him for a return to the world as it was, but to maintain a stable, supervised existence that prioritized the safety of society above all else. This reality underscores the often overlooked truth that the insanity defense is not a loophole, but a lifelong sentence to a reality defined by clinical surveillance, medication, and the total loss of the freedoms that most people take for granted. The hospital became a repository for the complexities of his case, a place where the cultural pressures of the Matai system and the tangible lesions in his frontal lobe were not just topics of debate, but the defining parameters of his daily existence. As we step back and look at the broader impact of this case, it is clear that its primary contribution to justice lies in the destigmatization of the brain as a physical organ subject to injury. Before the Sattel case, the legal system was often resistant to the idea that a murderer could be a victim of their own neurobiology. There was a strong preference for viewing criminal actions as the result of a deliberate, moral choice made by a rational actor. The Sattel trial successfully challenged this perception by presenting undeniable, clinical evidence that the capacity for moral reasoning is not a constant. It is a capacity that can be physically damaged, diminished, or entirely erased by trauma, toxins, or congenital conditions. This realization forced the courts to accept that some individuals are effectively strangers to themselves when they cross the threshold into extreme, violent behavior. This is a profound, even terrifying, realization, as it suggests that the line between a functioning, law-abiding citizen and an instrument of chaos is much thinner than our sense of personal security would like to admit. The cultural element of the case, specifically the role of the Matai system, provides a critical lens through which we must examine the pressures faced by marginalized populations in a modern, Western legal context. The case demonstrated that failing to understand the cultural and societal pressures on an individual can lead to a fundamental misunderstanding of the context behind a crime. For those residing in tight-knit, isolated communities, the social requirements of their heritage can act as an invisible, immense weight, exerting a level of psychological pressure that is completely unrecognizable to those living in more individualistic or secular environments. By acknowledging the role of this systemic pressure, the court in the Sattel case demonstrated a capacity for empathy and cultural literacy that was ahead of its time. It proved that justice is not blind in a positive sense, but rather informed, recognizing that human behavior cannot be neatly separated from the complex social, cultural, and biological tapestries that define our lives. The legacy of the victims, however, remains the most important aspect of this history, even as we focus on the academic and legal importance of the case. The lives of the two individuals lost in 1981 were the primary casualties of this tragic convergence, and their absence left a hole in the fabric of their community that no amount of clinical study or legal analysis could ever fill. Their story is a reminder that every forensic case, regardless of how intellectually fascinating it may be to experts, begins with a life ended prematurely and a family left in ruins. Our analysis must always return to this human foundation, acknowledging that the progress we make in understanding the damaged mind is bought at an unimaginable cost. The empathy we extend to the victims must remain the guiding principle of our reflection, ensuring that in our pursuit of legal and medical clarity, we do not become detached from the human sorrow that defines the very core of this tragedy. As we consider the future, the lessons of the Sattel case remain a necessary, if difficult, tool for navigating the evolving landscape of criminal justice. We are living in an era where our understanding of neuroscience is expanding rapidly, promising new insights into the physical mechanisms of the brain and their impact on behavior. This progress will only make the legal system's task more complex, as we are forced to decide exactly how much influence we will allow the biological and environmental record to have on our determination of guilt. The Sattel case provides a baseline for this deliberation, a standard of evidence, and a framework of thought that continues to be relevant decades later. It reminds us that justice is not just a destination but a continuous process of negotiation between the rigid demands of the law and the messy, unpredictable reality of human life. It demands that we continue to ask the hard questions. At what point does a human life cease to be an expression of personal agency and become a manifestation of neurological collapse? And how, as a society, do we reconcile the need for justice with the reality of human brokenness? In conclusion, the story of Sattel is one that leaves us with no easy resolutions, only a deeper, more profound awareness of the precarious nature of our existence. It stands as a testament to the fact that the most monumental events in legal history are often born from the most intimate and individual of catastrophes. The high-security ward of the Hawaii State Hospital remains a silent witness to the ongoing management of this tragedy, a space where the complexities of a single life are contained in a clinical record, guarded against the eyes of the public, but always present in the history of the state. As we continue to study and reflect on this case, let it serve as a beacon of caution and a call for a more informed, more compassionate approach to the complexities of the damaged human mind. We are all, in a sense, fragile entities navigating a world of immense, invisible pressures, and it is only through our commitment to understanding one another, even in our darkest moments, that we can hope to maintain the fragile, vital order of the society we share. The case of Sattel is, and will remain, an essential chapter in our ongoing journey to understand the depths of human nature, a chapter that warns us that the abyss is not always a place we fall into, but sometimes a place that forms within us, requiring the utmost vigilance, the most careful analysis, and an enduring, unwavering dedication to the truth. The final perspective on the Sattel case necessitates a retrospective look at how the convergence of clinical pathology and cultural systemic pressure fundamentally redefined the narrative of criminal culpability in the American legal system. As we draw the curtain on this comprehensive analysis, it is essential to synthesize the profound implications of this 1981 tragedy, not merely as an isolated incident, but as a pivotal turning point in the evolution of forensic psychiatry. The case remains a stark reminder that the courtroom is not just a venue for the administration of law, but a stage where the most complex and uncomfortable truths about human nature are laid bare. When we look at the trajectory of the legal proceedings, from the initial shock of the crime scene to the ultimate placement of Sattel within the controlled environment of the Hawaii State Hospital, we see a system struggling to articulate a language for things that defy simple categorization. The challenge was to balance the objective, undeniable reality of 2 lives lost with the subjective, often inaccessible reality of a mind that had physically dismantled its own ability to function. This balance is the core tension of the entire case, and it remains a central, unresolved dilemma in the broader field of law and human behavior. The institutionalization of Sattel was not simply a placement of a defendant in a facility. It was the creation of a permanent, managed reality that stood in direct contrast to the chaotic, unmanaged reality of the day he committed the murders. Within the high-security ward, his life became a microcosm of the very forensic insights that had saved him from the finality of a prison sentence. Every interaction, every treatment, and every observation was documented, analyzed, and integrated into a clinical record that served as the primary evidence of his ongoing, managed state. This reality provides a sobering lesson in the limitations of our ability to rehabilitate or repair profound organic brain damage. In a society that often promises that with enough time, resources, and intervention, any problem can be solved, the Sattel case offers a more grounded and perhaps more pessimistic observation. Some wounds, especially those that physically alter the structure of the brain, are enduring. The management of these conditions is the best that modern science can offer, and this reality demands a more humble and cautious approach to our expectations of the judicial and medical systems. Furthermore, the influence of the Matai system continues to be a subject of vital importance when considering how we analyze cases within culturally diverse or marginalized communities. The Sattel case did not just illuminate the biological failure of a frontal lobe, it cast a light on the invisible, suffocating pressures of a cultural hierarchy that permits no individual deviation. This understanding is critical for anyone seeking to provide a holistic, accurate, and empathetic assessment of human behavior in a multicultural society. By failing to account for the pressures of an ancestral, collective, and demanding social framework, the law risks being blind to the environmental catalysts that often drive individuals toward their breaking points. The Sattel trial serves as a warning against the dangers of a one-size-fits-all legal approach, advocating instead for a more nuanced investigation that incorporates the realities of sociology, anthropology, and cultural tradition into the forensic process. This shift in focus is not about diminishing individual responsibility. It is about ensuring that the lens through which we view accountability is wide enough to encompass the full, complex reality of human existence. As we consider the broader implications of this case for the future of criminal justice, we must also address the ethical responsibilities of the experts who are tasked with providing these critical and often life-altering assessments. The psychiatrists and neurologists involved in the Sattel case were not just offering medical opinions. They were, in effect, acting as the bridge between the physical reality of a broken brain and the social necessity of justice. Their testimony required an extraordinary level of precision, ethical integrity, and a willingness to withstand the intense public and judicial scrutiny that naturally surrounds a case of this magnitude. Their work remains a standard for how forensic experts should approach the complex task of determining capacity, demonstrating that scientific rigor and objective evidence must remain the bedrock of the legal process. The trust placed in these professionals is immense, and the Sattel case shows that when that trust is met with a deep, uncompromising commitment to the truth, the law is capable of making decisions that are both scientifically informed and fundamentally just, even when the outcome is one that defies simple emotional satisfaction. Reflecting upon the legacy of the victims, we are again reminded that no amount of legal progress or clinical study can ever replace the lives that were taken on that day. The profound, lingering sadness that permeates this story is not a failing of the justice system. It is a testament to the immense value of the human lives lost. The families of the victims, who had to navigate the harrowing process of the trial and the subsequent institutionalization of the perpetrator, carried a burden that is impossible for an outsider to truly comprehend. Their experience is the ultimate, necessary anchor for this entire narrative, reminding us that every debate about forensic psychiatry, every argument about criminal culpability, and every discussion of legal theory must be secondary to the reality of the human lives affected by such violence. The legacy of the victims is not found in the legal precedents established by the case, but in the enduring, quiet suffering of those who loved them and the memory of who they were before they became the subjects of a historical case study. In the final analysis, the story of Sattel is an essential, if deeply difficult, chapter in our ongoing efforts to understand the depths of human nature. It warns us that we are all, to some extent, vulnerable to the unexpected, often catastrophic, failures of the systems that define us, both the biological systems that govern our thoughts and the cultural systems that govern our social existence. We are reminded that the line between order and chaos is thinner than we would like to believe, and that the maintenance of that order requires a constant, collective vigilance, an unwavering commitment to understanding, and a deep, empathetic recognition of the fragility of our fellow human beings. As we move forward, let the case of Sattel be remembered not just for the legal and psychiatric debates it sparked, but as a humbling, powerful reminder of the responsibilities we share to one another. We must strive to build a justice system that is both firm in its commitment to protecting society and sophisticated in its capacity to understand the complex, often broken, humanity of those who commit the most horrific acts. This is the ultimate, eternal challenge of the law, and the case of Sattel remains one of the most powerful testimonies to the difficulty and the necessity of this work. As we look ahead, the evolution of forensic science will undoubtedly offer us new, more precise tools for observing the physical architecture of the brain, promising even greater insight into the mechanics of behavioral failure. This technical progress, while welcomed, must always be guided by the same humanistic principles that define the best parts of the Sattel trial: a commitment to accuracy, a respect for the complexity of human life, and an empathetic awareness of the profound impact of crime on the innocent. The story of Sattel, in all its complexity and all its tragedy, continues to serve as a vital touchstone for these principles. It remains a case that is studied not for its resolution, but for the profound, uncomfortable questions it forces us to ask about ourselves, our communities, and the very nature of what it means to be responsible for our actions in a world where the foundations of our own minds are not always as stable as we might assume. The silence that surrounds Sattel today in his hospital ward is not a finality, but a permanent, living testament to the ongoing importance of this conversation, a conversation that will continue as long as we seek to build a justice system that can hold the weight of our shared, fragile, and often incomprehensibly complex human reality, serving as a beacon that guides us through the shadows toward a more informed, more compassionate, and more deeply understood future for all of us, wherever we may stand in the intricate, fragile balance of life. The final chapter of this profound inquiry into the 1981 Sattel case requires a synthesis of the enduring lessons that continue to influence the legal and psychiatric communities across the globe. As we reflect on the totality of this tragedy, we find that its significance does not lie in the specifics of the crime, nor in the personal details of the perpetrator, but in the paradigm shift it necessitated within the courtroom. The trial stood as a crucible where the binary notions of absolute guilt and total innocence were melted down and reformed into a more sophisticated understanding of human agency, one that accounts for the biological and environmental variables that can physically shatter an individual's capacity to control their own behavior. The case is a testament to the fact that justice, in its most evolved form, must be as much about diagnosis and understanding as it is about verdict and sentencing. By accepting the testimony regarding organic brain damage and the suffocating, structural pressures of the Matai system, the legal system performed a necessary, if painful, act of expansion, allowing for the inclusion of scientific reality into the determination of criminal responsibility. This synthesis of law, neuroscience, and cultural anthropology remains the most vital legacy of the case. It serves as a permanent bridge between the clinical coldness of forensic reports and the human heat of criminal conduct, providing a template for how modern courts can navigate the complexities of severe pathology. The ongoing confinement of Sattel in the high-security ward of the Hawaii State Hospital is not merely a method of social protection. It is a long-term clinical experiment in the management of a fundamentally damaged mind. It demonstrates that when the internal machinery of human reasoning is broken, the responsibility of the state does not end with a guilty verdict or a term of years. It extends into a duty of care, oversight, and protection that is as complex as the conditions themselves. The case has taught us that the insanity defense, when used with rigor and supported by irrefutable medical evidence, is an essential tool for maintaining the integrity of a justice system that claims to be both fair and scientifically sound. Moreover, the cultural dimension of the case acts as a persistent reminder that we do not live in a vacuum of individualism. Our actions are deeply influenced by the environments we inhabit, the social hierarchies we navigate, and the expectations that are placed upon us by the communities that define our identities. For the Samoan diaspora in Hawaii, the Matai system was, and is, a source of profound strength, community, and tradition. Yet, the Sattel case forced an acknowledgement of the dark side of that same strength, the potential for institutional and familial pressure to manifest as a suffocating weight that can overwhelm an individual, especially one whose biological capacity for stress management is already compromised. This is a critical lesson for any legal or social system. To be effective, justice must be culturally literate. It must be able to distinguish between an intentional act of malice and an unintentional, tragic eruption born from the intersection of a fractured mind and an inflexible social structure. As we look toward the future, the influence of the Sattel case remains embedded in the training of forensic psychiatrists and the preparation of defense strategies worldwide. It serves as a foundational example of how a well-constructed, evidence-based insanity plea can force a court to confront the limits of moral judgment. It highlights the importance of neuroimaging, psychological testing, and the detailed reconstruction of a defendant's life history, not as a way to avoid consequences, but as a way to provide the court with the most accurate, objective picture possible. The case has contributed to a more compassionate, more analytical approach to the treatment of the mentally ill within the criminal justice system, encouraging a move towards specialized courts and diversion programs that aim to provide medical intervention rather than simple, reactive punishment. This is a profound improvement in the way we handle the most vulnerable and the most volatile among us, and it is a direct consequence of the lessons learned in the wake of the 1981 tragedy. Furthermore, we must return to the families of the victims, whose resilience and sorrow continue to define the most important aspect of this history. Their willingness to navigate the long, drawn-out process of the trial and the subsequent decades of legal and psychiatric proceedings is a testament to their strength. The memory of the individuals they lost must continue to be the primary focus of our empathy. Their tragedy serves as a constant, sobering reminder of the horrific cost of the violence that occurred, and it is in their name that we must continue to refine our systems of justice. We owe it to them to ensure that the legal and psychiatric lessons learned from this case are used to prevent, as much as possible, the occurrence of similar catastrophes. Our pursuit of understanding must never become so detached that we lose sight of the profound, irreplaceable value of the human lives that were extinguished on that day. As we reflect on the broader societal implications of the case, we are forced to acknowledge the terrifying ease with which the foundations of order can be compromised. We are all, to some extent, dependent on the stability of our own cognitive structures and the support of the communities that surround us. The story of Sattel reminds us that when these foundations are shaken, when the brain is damaged and the cultural support system becomes a source of extreme pressure, the descent into chaos can be sudden, total, and irreversible. This realization should foster a deeper, more profound sense of collective responsibility for the mental health and social well-being of all members of our communities. By prioritizing early intervention, fostering social support systems that balance tradition with individual needs, and maintaining an unwavering commitment to the scientific and psychological understanding of the human condition, we can create a safer, more resilient society. In the final analysis, the case of Sattel remains a permanent, living chapter in the history of the law, a chapter that continues to be read and reevaluated by every new generation of legal and medical professionals. It is a story that refuses to be simplified, a story that demands an active, ongoing effort to understand the depths of human behavior. The silence that surrounds the perpetrator in his secure ward is not the end of the conversation. It is the quiet resonance of the questions that the case continues to pose. What does it mean to be a person in the fullest sense of the word? How much of our behavior is truly our own? And how much is the result of the complex biological and cultural tapestry in which we are woven? And finally, how do we build a world where justice is not just a mechanism for punishment, but a path toward the truth, toward understanding, and toward the protection of the most precious, fragile elements of our shared existence? As we bring this account to a close, we acknowledge that the history of justice is never truly finished. It is a continuous narrative, an ever-evolving effort to reconcile the rigid demands of our laws with the fluid, often chaotic reality of human life. The case of Sattel is a landmark in that journey, a testament to the necessity of looking into the shadows, the necessity of embracing the complex truths of science, and the necessity of maintaining our humanity in the face of the most challenging, most tragic of circumstances. It remains a beacon of caution, a guide for future inquiry, and a profound, permanent reminder of the fragility of the human spirit. The echoes of 1981 will continue to sound, serving as a reminder that we must always strive to see more clearly, to understand more deeply, and to act with a commitment to a truth that is both scientifically objective and fundamentally, deeply, and unconditionally compassionate toward the human condition in all its broken, beautiful, and sometimes tragically compromised complexity. This, ultimately, is the greatest lesson of the case, that in the face of the most inexplicable violence, our only real defense is our capacity to understand, to learn, and to work together toward a future that is defined not by the shadow of the past, but by the light of a more informed, more empathetic, and more rigorously scrutinized pursuit of justice for all. The final perspective on this historical case of 1981, the tragedy involving Sattel, brings us to a place of profound reflection regarding the intersection of justice, medical science, and the evolving moral compass of our society. As we contemplate the totality of these events, we are forced to grapple with the reality that some human experiences cannot be neatly resolved within the halls of a courtroom. The case serves as an enduring reminder that the application of law is not merely a technical exercise in statute and precedent, but a profoundly ethical endeavor that must constantly adapt to the complexities of the human condition. When we look back at the path taken by the defense, the prosecution, and the court, we see an arc that moved from a place of initial, visceral condemnation toward a more nuanced, evidence-based understanding of the perpetrator's reality. This transition from a desire for simple retribution to an acceptance of medical and sociological complexity represents the highest aspiration of a civilized legal system, one that seeks not only to punish, but to understand the root causes of destructive behavior. The legacy of the Sattel case is that it provided the framework for this expansion, forcing the justice system to acknowledge that behind the act of violence, there may exist a physical, measurable deficit that undermines the very agency the law relies upon to function. The high-security ward of the Hawaii State Hospital, where Sattel has spent his life since the verdict, remains the quiet, permanent monument to this legal milestone. It is not a place of celebration, but a place of perpetual stewardship, where the medical reality of his brain damage is managed with daily, unrelenting consistency. In this environment, the abstract legal concept of insanity is transformed into the lived, concrete reality of psychiatric care. This is perhaps the most significant lesson for those who study the law, that a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity is not an exit, but an entry into a lifetime of controlled, clinical observation. By providing this detailed account, we have sought to illuminate the reality that such institutionalization is arguably a far more profound loss of personal freedom than a fixed-term sentence, as it is tied not to the calendar, but to the clinical determination of dangerousness. This reality challenges the common public narrative that an insanity defense is a gateway to freedom and reminds us that the state takes an immense, lifelong responsibility when it assumes control over an individual whose brain is fundamentally compromised. Furthermore, We must continue to consider the broader sociological impacts of the Matai system and how it informs our understanding of the cultural stressors that affect immigrant communities. The Sattel case is a cautionary tale regarding the immense psychological weight of collective identity and the potential for a community's greatest strengths to create, in certain circumstances, insurmountable internal pressures. Understanding this dynamic is not about casting judgment on the culture itself, but about recognizing that within the dense web of family and chiefly authority, there exist vulnerabilities that require sensitive, culturally informed approaches. As we move forward into a future where societies are increasingly interconnected and diverse, the lessons from the 1981 case become even more vital. We must be able to view criminal behavior not just through the narrow aperture of legal statutes, but through a lens that includes the cultural realities of the perpetrator's environment. This is an essential step toward a more equitable justice system, one that recognizes the diversity of human experience and the different ways that internal and external pressures can manifest as tragedy. The forensic psychiatrists and neurologists involved in the Sattel case performed a role that is perhaps the most difficult in the entirety of the legal process. They were required to stand between the objective, observable facts of the biology of the brain and the subjective, moral questions of the courtroom. Their testimony, grounded in the rigorous analysis of frontal lobe pathology and the systemic impact of environmental stress, set a high bar for future forensic investigations. They demonstrated that the most effective way to address the complexities of the human mind is through the honest, meticulous application of scientific knowledge. Their legacy is the established precedent that in cases of extreme, inexplicable violence, the court must be willing to look beyond the surface level of behavior to the physical mechanisms that inform our decisions and actions. This commitment to truth, even when that truth is deeply uncomfortable, is the hallmark of a system that is genuinely dedicated to justice rather than just the finality of a conviction. We must also continue to center our empathy on the victims and their families. While the legal and psychiatric dimensions of the case provide the academic interest, it is the loss of two vibrant lives that provides the heart of the matter. The enduring sorrow of those who knew the victims is the anchor that prevents our analysis from drifting into a purely clinical, detached abstraction. We must ensure that our pursuit of knowledge regarding the damaged brain never diminishes the gravity of the violence or the tragedy of the lives extinguished. The memory of the victims is the ultimate guide in our reflections, a reminder that the cost of these events is not paid in legal fees or psychiatric reports, but in the permanent, irrecoverable absence of those who were taken. Their story is the primary narrative, and all other discussions about the law, the mind, or the community are merely secondary explorations that should serve to honor their loss by preventing its recurrence. In the final, synthesized view, the case of Sattel is an essential, permanent contribution to the history of justice. It reminds us that we are all, to some degree, delicate, interconnected beings whose behavior is shaped by forces both deep within our biological structures and far beyond our immediate control. It challenges us to build a justice system that is not only robust enough to protect the innocent and firm in its commitment to the rule of law, but also sophisticated enough to recognize the profound, often tragic, limits of human agency. This is an ongoing, never-ending project, one that requires us to be constantly vigilant, constantly learning, and constantly refining our approach to the complexities of the human experience. The Sattel case will continue to be a touchstone for this project, serving as a beacon of caution, a guide for forensic investigation, and a profound reminder of the necessity of empathy and scientific precision in the pursuit of justice. As we look ahead, the integration of new technologies in brain imaging and genetic analysis will only continue to sharpen our understanding of the factors that lead to behavioral breakdown. This will inevitably lead to new, even more complex questions about the nature of free will and the responsibility of the individual in the face of their own biology. The Sattel case provides a foundational bedrock for these future inquiries, demonstrating that the effort to understand is always the best path forward, even when the path is filled with uncertainty and sorrow. We must maintain our commitment to this inquiry, ensuring that as our knowledge expands, our dedication to a fair, informed, and compassionate justice system grows alongside it. The story of Sattel is not just a historical incident. It is a living, breathing component of our legal landscape, a case that will continue to challenge, inform, and guide us in the eternal quest for justice in an imperfect, complex, and often unpredictable world. Ultimately, the lesson of this case is that our shared humanity is the most fragile and the most valuable thing we possess. Our ability to recognize the brokenness in others, to understand the forces that drive them to their limits, and to build systems that reflect that understanding is the hallmark of our progress as a society. The case of Sattel, in its tragedy and its complexity, stands as a mirror, reflecting both the darkest vulnerabilities of the human mind and the highest capacities of the legal system to address those vulnerabilities with integrity and wisdom. We will continue to debate its implications, study its details, and reflect on its legacy, but above all, we must ensure that it serves to remind us of the necessity of patience, the value of scientific truth, and the unwavering importance of humanity in every single facet of the pursuit of justice. The silence in the high-security ward is not empty. It is filled with the weight of this history, a weight that we must all share and continue to carry as we move forward into a future where we seek a more nuanced, more compassionate, and more enlightened understanding of the profound, often tragic, complexities of the human spirit. As we arrive at the 11th and concluding segment of this exhaustive exploration into the Sattel case, we find ourselves at the confluence of history, jurisprudence, and the deepest mysteries of the human condition. Over the preceding 10 parts, we have meticulously deconstructed the events of 1981, tracing the arc of a tragedy that transformed from a senseless, brutal double homicide into a cornerstone of forensic psychiatric law. We have traversed the dense social landscape of the Samoan diaspora in Hawaii, examining the immense, silent power of the Matai system and the crushing psychological weight it imposes upon those who falter. We have peered into the microscopic, fractured world of Sattel's frontal lobe, witnessing the catastrophic biological failure that rendered his behavioral control non-existent. We have analyzed the unprecedented legal battle that pitted the state's demand for punitive justice against the defense's revolutionary argument for medical exoneration, and we have lived within the clinical confinement that has defined the remainder of the perpetrator's life. Now, as we cast our final gaze upon this monumental case, we must ask what remains when the legal proceedings have faded and the medical reports have been filed away into the archives of time. The enduring resonance of the Sattel case lies not in its brutality, but in its absolute clarity regarding the necessity of a justice system that is capable of evolving. It stands as a testament to the fact that the law is not a static monolith, but a living, breathing entity that must, by necessity, absorb the advancements of neuroscience and the insights of cultural anthropology to maintain its legitimacy. The verdict, not guilty by reason of insanity, was more than a mere acquittal for one man. It was an admission by the legal system that it lacked the moral and intellectual capacity to hold a human being accountable for an act of pure biological destruction. This was a profoundly humble moment for the court, a rare instance where the rigid machinery of justice bowed to the complexity of the human brain. This humility, this willingness to acknowledge the limitations of legal culpability in the face of organic ruin, remains the most powerful and meaningful takeaway of the entire affair. It provides a standard against which all future cases of criminal insanity must be measured, a beacon that guides the way when the facts are murky and the motivations are buried under the weight of pathology. The institutionalization of Sattel serves as a perpetual, living reminder of the reality that society's responsibility to those who are fundamentally broken does not end with a gavel strike. By maintaining him within the secure, monitored environment of the state hospital, the legal system demonstrated that the goal of justice is not merely to remove an individual from the community, but to provide a structured, clinical existence that manages the inherent danger posed by their condition. This long-term stewardship is a testament to the immense burden that the state assumes when it acknowledges a defendant's lack of agency. It is a burden that involves decades of medical intervention, constant risk assessment, and the quiet, unending work of maintaining order within the walls of a secure psychiatric facility. This reality is often lost in the public perception of the insanity defense, which frequently reduces the process to a simplistic transaction. The Sattel case corrects this narrative, showing that the resolution is a lifelong, complex obligation that is far more demanding than the standard, punitive process of incarceration. In reflecting upon the victims, whose names and memories are the foundation of this entire analysis, we must reiterate that their loss is the ultimate, non-negotiable reality of this case. No amount of legal precedent, clinical insight, or historical documentation can ever alter the fundamental fact that 2 lives were ended and the world was left permanently lesser for their absence. We have sought to honor them not by romanticizing the crime or the perpetrator, but by placing the tragedy within the context of a larger, systemic examination that seeks to prevent the repetition of such horror. Their memory demands that we do not look away from the uncomfortable, painful, and often ugly truths that the case has brought to light. It demands that we hold our justice system to the highest possible standard, ensuring that it remains committed to the rigorous investigation of the truth, even when that truth is deeply unsettling and complicates our simplified moral frameworks. Their lives were the cost of this historical lesson, and the least we can do is to ensure that the lesson is learned, applied, and never forgotten. As we conclude this long, detailed, and often arduous journey, we are forced to acknowledge the profound, fragile nature of our own shared existence. We exist as beings whose lives are balanced on a knife's edge between the stable, functioning architecture of our minds and the chaotic, uncontrollable reality of our biological and social environments. The Sattel case is a mirror that reflects the inherent fragility of the human experience. It forces us to confront the fact that, given the right set of circumstances, the right set of internal lesions, and the right level of environmental pressure, even the most ordered life can descend into incomprehensible disaster. This is not a cause for despair, but a call for a greater, more profound sense of empathy for one another. It is a call to be more vigilant in our support of those who are struggling, more rigorous in our commitment to scientific understanding, and more compassionate in our approach to those who, due to forces beyond their control, have lost the ability to navigate the world as we do. The legacy of this case will continue to travel through time, appearing in the studies of law students, the reports of forensic clinicians, and the reflections of those who seek to understand the darker aspects of our human journey. It will remain a touchstone for discussions regarding the limits of individual agency, the role of cultural pressure in personal breakdown, and the absolute necessity of a justice system that is informed by the latest, most accurate scientific understanding of the brain. The story of Sattel is now a permanent chapter in the human saga, a chapter written in blood and law, but read with the eyes of wisdom and the heart of empathy. It serves as a stark, permanent reminder that the pursuit of justice is not a destination, but a never-ending, evolving process of negotiation between the demands of order and the realities of human brokenness. We have arrived at the end of this account, but the conversation it inspires is far from over. It will continue as long as we remain committed to the ideal of a society that is not only protected by the law but also deepened by our collective, unwavering pursuit of the truth. In our closing thoughts, we must look to the future with a renewed sense of responsibility. As technology continues to unlock the secrets of the brain, and as our society continues to grapple with the complex intersections of culture and individual identity, we must carry the lessons of the Sattel case with us. We must ensure that our justice system remains flexible enough to evolve, rigorous enough to demand the highest quality of evidence, and compassionate enough to recognize the humanity in every person, no matter how deeply that humanity may be obscured by trauma, biology, or the catastrophic failure of the mind. This, in its most essential form, is the mandate of justice in the modern age. It is a mandate that requires us to be brave enough to confront the shadows, smart enough to harness the light of scientific discovery, and humble enough to acknowledge that we are all, in the final analysis, vulnerable to the same chaotic, beautiful, and sometimes tragic forces that define the shared human journey. The case of Sattel is finished, but its echoes remain, a quiet, insistent reminder of our duty to one another and our ongoing, sacred quest for a truth that is both deeply seen and profoundly understood.